Hello, Frank Casey. For the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to be giving you a quick overview of our Chasing Madoff story. The story really is the closest thing to a Shakespearean financial tragedy you will ever hear. People were destroyed, reputations sullied, icons toppled, senior people at the Securities Exchange Commission had to resign, and people died. The story really is one of Harry Markopolos and myself and a band of two other people that we put together that were basically in Boston, Harry and a few of his friends trying to level the playing field to remove a cancer from the financial industry, Bernie Madoff. And we got into the chase in the spring of '99 when we were working together at a firm called Rampart. Harry Markopolos was the portfolio manager of about $8.5, $9 billion portfolios of options overlays. I was product development and marketing, and Neil Cello was the assistant PM. We were trying to come up with additional programs by which we could raise institutional money, and I've been hearing a lot about the demand for 1% a month like clockwork with very low standard deviation. Well, you can't do that in the markets, especially with the options markets. So I started innovating structured financial products and using hedge fund of funds as underlying assets and wrapping them with bank guarantees as to the return of principal. Harry tells me about one individual that had hired one single secret manager that he heard about in New York that was producing 1% a month like clockwork. And I said, I got to see this. So I go down to Madison Avenue and I'm introduced by the young fellow to his boss, Thierry Magon de la Villicher. And Thierry was the past president of Credit Lyonnais USA. Thierry was very connected to the asset management business in Europe. He knew all of the big wealth management banks in Europe, and Thierry was royalty. I mean, he owned a 100-room castle in Brittany, and he went grouse shooting with the princes, and he was a competitive world-class sailor. And I was a sailor and of basic means, and we formed a little bond. And so I asked him about the secret manager, and he had one. He couldn't tell me who it was because if the manager found out about it, he would fire him and return him his money. And nobody wanted their money back. They wanted to earn 1% a month like clockwork. And I asked him about the fees the manager was charging. He says he doesn't charge me a fee. He's just happy with the trading. I go, this is crazy. And how often does he trade? He trades maybe 6, 7 times a year, and for a couple days to a few weeks. And he trades the biggest stocks in the S&P 500, called the OEX 100. And he does some kind of an option strategy. I don't fully understand, says Thierry. And I look at it, and sure enough, it's option split strike conversion work. And what that is basically you are buying stocks, a basket of stocks of the 100 stocks, and the biggest stocks in the United States. And then what you're doing is selling a call, giving someone the right to buy it from you at an appreciated price. And for a period of time, like 90, 120 days. And you're with that premium, you're buying protection on the downside, supposedly. But the protection and the call feature are both out of the money by a tune of 10 to 15% away. So you better be correct on the call of the markets. Doesn't take too many stocks that fall to wipe out your gains. So in either case, Thierry Magon de la Villicher had close to, at that point, $320 million with that secret manager. And I mean, in the world of allocated capital from pension funds and so forth, they would not normally give more than 10% whatever the manager was running. So you basically, if the manager is running $1 billion, they give them $100 million maximum. So you take the 320 million and you multiply by 10, that's 3.2 billion. Let me put it into perspective. In the spring of 1999, the biggest managers in the world, the George Soroses, the Monroe Trouts, the Tewksburys, the Tudor Joneses, were running 2 billion or under. So here's a manager that's running 3 billion, bigger than the biggest dogs on Wall Street, nobody knows about, using a strategy that doesn't make any sense. And so we began the hunt. Now, the reason we began the hunt was that we initially wanted Thierry Magon de la Villicher's attention because he had offered me a competitive allocation if I could come up with a strategy that would compete with the secret manager. and we were option geeks. And we figured, well, let's take a look at it. And surely I wasn't selling into the European wealthy, so I would love to be able to get into there using Thuray. And so I took it back to the bosses. They got very excited at Rampart. They took me down to the manager, Harry Markopolos. And I said, well, listen, he's using a secret manager, but the real name of that manager I figured out by using something that's untoward, basically. I was in the clerk's office and I spun a piece of paper and saw the heading on it, Bernard Madoff Securities. I didn't even know who the guy was. I came from the derivatives world. I mean, I wasn't in the block traders. And we found out that, of course, he was the chairman of the NASDAQ, something that he developed, the electronic trading system for over-the-counter stocks. And he was trading close to 10% of the the U.S. daily volume of the stock market. This guy was big. He was a big dog. And so you didn't call this guy a fraud, lightly anyhow. And I showed the return stream that Thuray Magon had for over two years of investing with his secret manager. And Harry looks at me and says, come on, you're an options geek. You understand this is a fraud. I said, oh, absolutely. I know it's a fraud, Harry. But what's he really doing? Because I have to reverse engineer it in order to be able to compete with this guy. What is he doing? He says, it's a fraud at the least, and it's probably a Ponzi scheme. I said, don't use that word Ponzi. I mean, my God, this guy's a big dog on the street. We better figure it out. So he says, I'd like it to take it to the SEC. I said, please hold off. Let me find out some more information. And so this was the spring of 1999. Late 99, I get a phone call from a wealthy family out of the Carolinas I had never met. And they said, hey, listen, would you come down to New York and sit around the low-slung hassocks at the lobby of the Swiss Hotel and let's talk? I said, fine. So I go on down and they hand me their prospectus, another 75-page document that tells you the manager can do anything to anybody anywhere in the world using any instrument at any time. That's basically a prospectus. And then I go right to the back and I look at it, and Addendum A has a manager that's using a split strike conversion strategy there again. And he's also ran up and down, with the markets, which is about right. And then I look at manager B, and it's a straight line, 45-degree angle from your left to your upper right without any downside blips. I said, my God, Bernie Madoff. They said, who told you? And I said, what do you mean, who told me? Don't tell anybody we told you. I said, I know, because if he hears about it, he'll give you back your money and you won't be able to invest with him. Well, can you use him inside your instruments, your structured notes as an asset driver? I said, very possibly. They said, okay, here's the prospectus. And now they had been investing some 5 years. I took it back to Harry and he said, well, now I've got some information. I'm going to build a mathematical model and we're going to basically do what this guy says he's doing. He's picking 25 to 35 of the top stocks in the United States out of the OAX 100, the S&P 100. We're going to basically randomly, synthetically buy those things multiple times a day. We're going to write calls. We're going to buy puts for protection, and we're going to run machinations for 4 hours, Monte Carlo simulations. I said, fine. He comes back and he says, do you know what it produced? The Treasury bill rate of return. Well, T-bills weren't earning 16. Well, wait a minute, Frank. 1% a month is 12%. How do you get to 16? Well, though Bernie wasn't charging a fee, the feeder funds were. Thuray Magon de la Villiers was charging 1% and a fifth of the profits. So 1% from the 16% is 15, 20% of 15 is another 3, 4 off the top, nets 12. And so the hunt began because I couldn't compete with this guy, this secret manager. If we put up a number, the fraudster puts up a bigger number. You can't compete with a fraud. And so we were competitors initially for about 2 weeks until we figured out there was no way to really compete with this manager at all. But the fact that we were competitors was heralded by every chairman of the SEC stating, oh, these guys are disgruntled competitors. Well, first of all, if you want to go after a fraud and you've got a whistleblower, who better to understand the fraud than a major competitor, right? We know all the machinations of the markets. Couldn't be done. So anyhow, we decided to create a level playing field. To get Harry to produce a return, we had to use our regular methodologies, and we couldn't reverse engineer. He wouldn't do it. And we had to compete with the options arena. And so we had to get Madoff off the playing field because he was a fraudster. And I wanted the affections of Thierry Megan de la Villiers through his firm Access International Advisors in order to get into the wealthy of Europe. So we started getting information. And around the fall of 2000, I was speaking in Barcelona on structured financial product again. And I met the fellow that was the host of the conference from Mar Hedge, Managed Account Reports Hedge. He was the editor, Michael Ockrant. And Michael was an investigative reporter on the side. And so that was his true love. He loved investigations. Now, Harry had been to the SEC and in May of 2000, and they had blank looks. Harry came back and said, if blank looks were dollar bills, buddy, we'd be rich. But they didn't understand what he was talking about. So they said, we'll put a cover letter on it, send it to New York. It's their problem because this guy Madoff is down in New York, not Boston. We never heard anything, of course. We tried to get investigative reporters to pay attention, but the big Wall Street firms and then the newspapers, nobody wanted a piece of this. You had an innuendo. You don't have a smoking gun. We don't take on a top dog like that with just an innuendo. And so we started building what we call a mosaic of intelligence. If the manager's secret and the investors aren't telling you that they're invested, you have to pick up little bits of information and put together a composite picture of intelligence, of what the real situation was. So that began the hunt. Harry and I shook hands on it. Neil Cello joined in. Michael Ockrant was involved also because he produced a report in 2001, May of 2001. Madoff tops the charts, trader asks how. And the traders, he didn't call him a fraud, Madoff, but he said, listen, this guy's better than anybody in my database on a risk-adjusted rate of return divided by the volatility of return. And he's bigger than anybody in my database. And he's doing some secret stuff here where nobody knows what he's doing. That's a story. And then Barron's picked up on that story because they had been doing something from another angle where they were going to talk more about the secrecy of the guy. And they 4 days later came out with the story using some of Michael's work and then saying, Madoff is so secretive that even his clients are asked to keep mum. And so we were giving each other high fives in the office. Here comes the posse. I mean, the SEC's got to pay attention now. Nothing. Nothing for days, for weeks. Who is this guy Madoff? How powerful is this man? How connected is he that he can squash a potential SEC investigation? If they had picked up information on a small startup manager, they'd been down there in a day shutting him down. What's really going on here? So we began and continued the hunt. And I left Rampart in the end of 2001 and joined a hedge fund of funds, which is like a mutual fund instead of investing in stock, and invest in hedge fund guys, which then invest in stocks and bonds. And so I was down in New Jersey on this, and Harry calls me and says, hey, you know, the bosses have been on me constantly since you left about reverse engineering this thing and getting into the Ray Megan de la Villiers. And I came up with a competitive strategy. I said, really? Come on down and show me. And I looked at that strategy and I said, Harry, come on. If you get out of bed on the wrong side of bed on the last day of trading of the equity options market, well, your client could lose 25, 30% of their capital. He goes, oh no, 50%. I go, 50% loss in one day. Who the devil would invest in this? He says, Frank, I might get a long run of 7, 10 years before I lose that money. I said, but you can't guarantee it. You could lose it on day one. He says, come on, Frank. The bosses wanted something. I'm going to give it to them. It was tongue in cheek by a geek. In other words, you ask a statistical geek how to do something, he'll tell you can't be done. You keep pushing, he'll give you something, but you don't want it. So in either case, I said, who would pay attention to this thing? He says, well, Thierry Megan de la Villiers is taking me to 20 banks in Europe. I said, you got to be kidding. Call me when it's over. And Thuray took him to the Champs-Élysées, and under the Arc de Triomphe, he says, hey, look up at the names emblazoned under Napoleon, and Magon's there. That's his middle name, Thuray. And all the names are ringing a bell, and Harry takes out his appointment calendar for the next 2 weeks, and they're all there. They were the admirals and the field marshals of Napoleon. Their descendants run the wealth management banks of Europe. And Harry would see them, and they would all say the same thing. 14 out of 20 said the exact same thing. You might believe it on the first hearing, maybe the second. It's implausible on the third, but 14? Oh, you got a good strategy, Harry. That's a little more risky, but it produces better returns than Madoff. But, Madoff's closed, he's not accepting any new money. We heard that story for a full 8 years of investigation. He's not taking new money, but he kept growing like cancer. And he takes our money at XYZ in Geneva, and only our money. We have a special pipeline access to him. You hear that 14 times. Then you know that it's much bigger in Europe. Harry was getting nervous because I was starting to uncover that you had investors coming out of Russia that had been very connected individuals to the KGB, maybe FSB, as it became. And they were investors, and they were moving money through Cyprus and into Austria, and the Austrian bank was investing as a feeder fund into Madoff. And I'm saying this is getting really ugly. And Madoff himself, if he finds out that you're hunting him and his investors become disgruntled, Madoff could be a big risk. And so maybe the lesser of the two evils is to pop Harry. Now, if you think that's crazy, after the investigation was over and Madoff collapsed, the FBI in New York said, we don't know how you're still alive. People die for $10,000, $50 billion. They were making 4%, 3% per year off of that money, the feeder funds. And so Madoff was like an octopus, a head of an octopus hiding in a crevice. And his long tentacles were out there. They were the feeder funds, and they were sucking in the victims, the investors. And they were being fed 2 to 4% per year. Madoff didn't charge a fee. He was just happy with the trading. And so to us, of course, it was a rob Peter to pay Paul scheme, a Ponzi scheme. And the affinity fraud, which is always the basis for a Ponzi, has to do with the institutions because they were all involved and they were complicit, and many of them were willfully blind. We really don't want to know. And they're saying, they're swearing to their central banker that they have custody of their assets, but it's really their Cayman subsidiary that's swearing they have custody of the assets. And the Cayman subsidiary is really giving the money back to Madoff, and who had to hold his own custody. So nobody had the assets. We're jumping up and down like the emperor has no clothes, but, we just look like jokers on the sideline. We submitted 4, maybe 5 submittals to the SEC. The biggest one was in late November, early December of 2005. Don't forget, this hunt began in April of or spring of '99, and we really went to the SEC, or Harry did, in May of 2000. So here we are in 2005 and December, and as big as Titanic sinks, the print says, the largest hedge fund in the world is a fraud. Now, do you think if you're in charge of investigation at the SEC, you may want to read that piece? Right into the circular file. Disgruntled competitors. The story goes on through 2007, where we saw cracks in his whole financial structure from hearing word on the street. And, I was traveling around because I had joined a fund of hedge funds, and I recruited Neil Cello, Harry's second in command, over to be one of our analysts. And so he was traveling, and I could be anywhere in the world. I mean, I could be at a conference in Zurich, and a financial conference, and I'm talking to you, and you're the head of a risk management at a Japanese bank. And I say, what do you know about Bernie over drinks? And you look at me and say, well, what do you know about Bernie? Nobody wanted to admit that they might have a position with Bernie where the administrators, the custodians, or they're in the wiring funds business or whatever. They would do a little horse trading of information. I wasn't admitting I was hunting Madoff. They weren't admitting anything, but we both walked away a little happier. And that's how we built our mosaic of intelligence. And so I never knew anything about the individual investors. I mean, it didn't make any sense. I never even thought of it. We were institutional people. And in November of 2008, I happened to be in a high-rise banking situation and talking to the head of product development. And he said, well, what you do, Frank, is way too complex. Our clients will never do this. I said, oh, no problem. And so I was packing up my wares and leaving. And he said, what do you know about Madoff? I froze at the door. I spun around. I said, why are you asking me something about Madoff? I never mentioned Madoff. He says, well, you've got gray hair and you've been talking derivatives for an hour. Who else would know something about Madoff? I said, I'm not neither confirming or denying, but I mean, why do you want to know? And I'm going to call him Abe. And Abe said, well, you know, I've got a situation here in the family, and it has nothing to do with this firm, that I've got to vet, and I don't know where to go, and you can help me out, and you might be able to save the family fortune. I said, I don't know. He said, Frank, please tell me. So I told him everything about the story. And he said, would you put it in writing? I said, I don't think I want a bullet in the head. He said, are you kidding me? I said, a lot of risk out there. I said, don't think I want to do that. I said, well, okay, I told you, you tell me. And Abe says, well, you know, I got married to one of the richest Jewish women in the United States. Sole heir to a family fortune. And at the wedding, Madoff slapped me on the back and said, now that you're extended family, I'm going to let you into my fund. And my new father-in-law is saying, you know, you got to take care of our daughter now. And I grew up with Bernie. And because of that, I have access to Bernie. You know, he's closed, you know, he's not accepting any new money. But I have access, and therefore you're going to have access by extension. And you should probably get that bank that you're involved in to get access to. And he says, I'm a finance guy, says Abe, but I don't understand options and derivatives. Would you help us? Would you put it in writing? And I said, oh, you know what? If my name gets out there, I swear I'm going to seek retribution. Do you understand what I'm saying to you, Abe? And he says, I do. I said, okay. So I told him everything. I went home and thought about it, had a drink, had a cigar, had another drink. I wrote the longest email of my life. And I was citing 26 of the 29 red flags. I put a disclaimer on the bottom of that thing that would sink a ship. Dog found it on the sidewalk, brought it over to me anonymously. I picked it up, read it, given it to you without comment. You know, do your own due diligence type of thing. I hit send, never heard from her. That was November 8th. Around December 8th, my phone rings, my cell phone. I'm in an elevator and a high rise, and Harry says, screaming, Madoff just capitulated. You know, we sent the head of risk assessment at the SEC an email in May, and we said, we gave this thing to you between $3 and $5 billion in 2000. It's 2008, and it's over $50 billion. You should go burn in hell. And we meant it. And he says, Madoff just capitulated and admitted to $50 billion. We had the number right on the nose. I said, let me get back upstairs. So I go back up into my condo, and I'm talking to Harry on my one phone. My other phone rings, and it's Michael Ocront, the investigative reporter, and we're doing one of these numbers. And then my house phone rings, and my wife says, he won't say who it is, but you know him. And he said it's referenced this Madoff situation. I figured, oh, some select reporter already got a hold of my name. How the hell did they do that? So I'll call you guys later. And it was Abe. And I said, Abe, and his voice is cracking. He's almost crying. I said, he says, I guess you heard. And I said, yeah. He says, you were probably talking to Harry. I said, yep, and Michael. And he said, I said, what happened, Abe? He says, I sat my father-in-law down at the kitchen table, and I read him every word of that email. I swear to God, thank you for trying to help us save us, and thank you for helping to save individual investors. I said, I didn't save anybody. But he said, you tried. So he said, my father-in-law started rocking back and forth with his head got dropped to his knees, between his knees. And he says, who are these guys? Where are they getting this information? They've got this thing drawn all over the world. They've got flows coming in. I don't know if any of that's real. He says, I think they're probably good guys, but they're wrong. And he stands up and he says to Abe, I grew up with Bernie. He would never do this to me. Abe says, we just lost everything. And I put down that phone, and I had such fist of rage because we never thought of the individual investor. There was no reason to rip off the individual investor in charities. We had more dumb banks that wanted to send billions of dollars, but couldn't get the access. And so we were worried, postscript, we were worried about my old friend Thierry Megan de la Villeche. I had developed another business with him, potential. We never completed it. But during that process, had nothing to do with Madoff and options and that type of thing, with this kind of options business. And so we were having a drink down in New York before dinner, and I said, hey, going back to Madoff. He goes, oh, you're going back to Madoff, you and Harry. You never shut up about Madoff. Come on. I mean, you know you're wrong. I'm right. I said, but what happens if we're right and you're wrong? And he puts his drink down and he looked at me solemnly and he said, if you are right and I am wrong, I am a dead man. Nervously, I looked at him and I said, you don't mean that, literally. He goes, well, let me put it to you this way, Frank. I have all of my money in it. I have most of my family's money in it. His family bailed out Louis XIV, by the way. One of our researchers figured out later on. He says, I was the past president of Credit Lyonnais, USA. I knew every wealth management bank in Europe. I have them all in it. He says, I have the biggest, wealthiest heiress of the cosmetic industry in it, and I probably have half the royalty of Europe in it. There's no way out for me. We talked, Harry and I and Neil, about maybe calling Thierry and consoling him, but it would have sounded like I told you so. About a week and a half or so after Madoff went down, when Thierry figured out he was never getting his money back, he locked the office door and he slit his veins and he bled himself out in a trash can. And when I was doing the Madoff affair for Frontline, Marty Smith, the producer, said, what do you think about that? And paraphrased, I said, maybe in my mind only. The man was a hunter and a sailor. If he couldn't take the pressure, he could have removed himself with an accident. He took the methodology of death that he did to atone for his sins of omission. Cut. They said, we got to get that backed up. And they get his brother, Thierry's brother, in Paris. And you hear his voice on the film say, it's a little old-fashioned, but when you fail your clients and your friends, this is how we handle it. In other words, they go out like royalty. And I cried. Thank you.